Today I'm having 2 minutes on the couch with Paris Portingal. Paris was one of our first authors, and he's the author of Art and the Drug Addict's Dog, which is what I'm reading from today. And I find Paris's writing fascinating in that he's like Stephen King, not in the way he writes, in the way he understands people. He understands what goes on in the psyche. And Art the Drug Addict's Dog is about Art Handel, and Art is a contract killer with depression and a stun gun and a dog called Fletcher that he bought off the local drug addict, Rainbow Davis. And there's a section in the book where Rainbow dies and Art takes him to hospital, and it's really moving. It's beautiful, and I was going to read from that, but it's a bit too long. So what I'm reading from today is a section where Art has lost his contract, Victor Mizzi. He went to kill him. He put him in the boot of his car. He drove him to where he was going to bury him, and Victor's no longer in the boot. It's funny when you're trying to find something, how you can check the same place twice or even 3 times, even when you know you checked thoroughly the first time. Hope makes you do it, and it can be an irrational emotion, like with Alex's night friend, Hans Jürgen, the German bomber pilot who bailed out of his Dornier one night at 40,000 feet with a faulty parachute. It was a long way down, and he passed the time, his quarter-acre of silk flapping uselessly overhead, imagining himself landing on something soft, which he didn't, but he was hoping. So it was in that spirit that I looked about the immediate vicinity with my torch, in among the shrubbery, hoping that Victor Mizzi was somewhere there, behind a bush somewhere, because he certainly wasn't in the boot. I checked it again, then the shrubbery again. I couldn't leave, that would mean I'd lost him. That would mean the lid was capped on the thing, and the night that was supposed to end there would instead go on, down a stretch I could never see ending. I even checked the back seat, and then, more ridiculously, the front passenger seat. That's how crazy a thing hope is. Hans Jürgen probably had 1 chance in a million of landing on something that would break his 40,000-foot fall, but the chances of Victor Mizzi being there in the front seat of my talk flight were incalculable. Too many noughts, hundreds of millions to one, more, hundreds of billions to one, zeros going off the edge of the page. I sat in the car for a long time with the door open, trying to think of what to do. Nothing would come. Fletcher sat beside me and occasionally got out and came around to my side and jumped up and licked my face. When I knew finally there was nothing to do, I turned to thinking what I'd tell Mr. Dean. When that proved fruitless, I closed the doors, turned the car around and drove back home, keeping an eye out for Victor Mizzi on the way, the way you do for your wallet when you find you don't have it and you're retracing your steps. The sun was coming up when we got back. I fed Fletcher, then slept for a few hours, and when I woke, I sent an email to Mr. Dean. To Mr. Dean. Subject, problem. We have a problem. I said we because a problem shared is a problem halved, but in my heart of hearts, I knew Mr. Dean was unfamiliar with the concept of sharing. 10 minutes later, there was a reply in my inbox. It said simply, meet me. So I left Fletcher and drove to a multi-level car park in Chinatown, and I circled the talk flight up through seahorses, sailing boats, dolphins, shells and anchors to penguins, where I parked in a bay with Fuck Island and the Low Counties sprayed on one of the pillars. About 5 to 1, I found a table towards the back of Mao's kitchen, a Chinese restaurant with white-down tables and a blackboard menu unchanged since Chairman Mao himself shuffled off his own mortal coil, the chalk of which had absorbed the grease of over 3 decades of Chinese cooking. The table across from me had a family, father, mother and 9-year-old son. They were loud. I could hear their conversation over the restaurant din. The son was saying, if I was a waiter, I'd carry the plates on my head. The father said, talk sense or don't talk at all, Brian. Act your age. They'd ordered a course each and there was no sharing. I'm 9 1/4, Dad. This is how 9 1/4 aged people act, Dad. Just don't talk rubbish. I could try and act 10 1/4, but Ray Simons is 10 1/2 and he's an idiot. Don't be smart. Dad was eating chicken with cashews, shoveling it down. Brian said, this is Ray Simons. Give me homework, Brian. Give me that biscuit, Brian. Let me punch you in the head, Brian. He's an idiot. Mr. Dean joined me at that point, and I lost focus on Brian and Ray. Mr. Dean was short, balding, sliding towards overweight, and had once been given a dead rat in a box as a going-away present when he left the provost. He told me that himself. He thought it was funny. A waitress stopped and Mr. Dean ordered wonton soup and, through lack of inspiration or interest, I ordered wonton soup as well. And Mr. Dean said, so? The restaurant was noisy. We were leaning towards each other over the table. I said, I lost Victor Mizzy. It was hard to read any expression on Mr. Dean's face. He said, how do you mean? I had him in the boot. When we got to our destination, he was gone. How? I don't know. He's a big man, but I had him double taped. I don't know. Mr. Dean stared at the table for a while, then looked up and looked at me, straight in the eyes. We were still leaned across the table. It was all I could do to hold his stare. It's not something we do naturally as a species. I suppose he was checking me for porkies. The eyes are the mirror of the soul, where porkies live. There were no porkies there. He said, you know what I do when I lose something? I waited because I thought the question was rhetorical, but Mr. Dean was not one for pointless rhetoric. Like so many men of his height all through history, he was more about control. So I said, what? I retraced my steps. And if you still can't find it, we'll talk about that after you've retraced your steps. The waitress brought our wonton soups then. She also left a saucer with 2 fortune cookies. Mr. Dean speared a wonton with his fork and blew on it, then ate it, so I did the same thing. Then he dropped his fork into the soup, and I hung on to mine because I didn't want to look like I was parodying his actions the way kids do when they repeat everything the other person says, because I know how annoying that can be. Instead, I held the fork in my mouth and picked up one of the fortune cookies and crumbled it. Mr. Dean stood and said, contact me. I picked up the saucer with his fortune cookie and held it out to him. I don't need a fortune cookie to tell me what's going to happen, he said. And I thought if I was ever writing bad lines for a bad movie, I'd put that on the first page. I took the fork out of my mouth, but he pushed his chair in and was walking away. I watched him leave with his small man's almost aggressive walk, then smoothed the slip of paper that held my fortune. It said, dismantle the bridge shortly after crossing it. It went into my pocket in case I needed to refer to it again. It was interesting advice. In the West, we tend to burn our bridges, and it was refreshing to find a culture that offered the structure some level of respect. Mr. Dean's fortune was there in front of me in its little folded biscuit, so it was natural that I cracked it open to see what the fates had in store there. I stretched the paper flat out, and, with just the tiniest feeling of prying guilt, I read, if you have money, you can make the ghosts and devils turn your grindstone. Mr. Dean had been right. He didn't need to be told that. But the power of the fortune cookie had been demonstrated. Swapped around, and neither of our fortunes would have made sense. One of the other things I love about Art and the Drug Addict's Dog is it brings back wonderful memories. This alleyway, if you know the Blue Mountains of New South Wales, this is an alleyway in Katoomba. And we recorded the cover, or we did the photo shoot for the cover on a July evening, middle of winter. It was bloody cold. We contacted the police first to let them know that Paris would be holding an imitation gun so that they didn't sort of show up in the alleyway after reports and arrest us for what have you. And we did the photo shoot. And while we were setting it all up and everything, Paris's lovely wife Diana said to me, she said, I'd really love to get Paris to do a book of short stories. And I was like, nobody reads short stories anymore. She said, no, I think they do. And that planted a seed in my head. In another 3 months, it'll be 5 years since we shot that cover. And it'll be 5 years in September since we started Narrator. Narrator magazine was inspired by Diana's comment to me that night about doing a book about short stories. And now we have Narrator International, which publishes fiction, short fiction daily, poetry and short stories. And it all came about as a result of shooting this cover on a cold July night in Katoomba in the Blue Mountains, New South Wales. So Art the Drug Addict's Dog has a lot of meaning for me, apart from the fact that I just enjoy reading it. But the 6 degrees of separation that happen when you do one thing and one thing leads to another if you just follow the path. It's all good fun. But Art the Drug Addict's Dog, if you'd like to read more, it's available on Amazon, Booktopia, Fishpond, Book Depository UK, and all your favourite ebook stores, as well as themothshop.com.au. Hope to see you reading it soon.